Welcome to the AxeCast podcast. Conversations with interesting people from the world of Acadia athletics and more, talking about their lives, successes, and failures. And now let's join hosts Glenn Hawley and Eric Cederberg for the next 15 to 20 minutes as they dive into the life of today's guest.
Well, this week on our AxeCast, we are going back a little over 20 years to visit with a 2002 grad. I say a little over 20 years because that's when he arrived from Deer Lake, Newfoundland to play as a guard for the Acadia varsity Axeman. Saj Joseph is joining us this week. Saj, thanks for doing this.
Pleasure to be here, Len and Eric. It's quite an honor, and I've been watching this podcast for a little while now, and I'm excited to be here and talk to you a little bit about my experience today, which is great.
Well, it's you were a fun player to watch, an exciting guard all over the floor, which we'll sort of get into some basketball stories. But yeah, Saj, you got to sort of take us back to the Rock and your path to Acadia. How did you end up coming to play for Dave Nutbrown?
There's, geez, you're taking me way back, Len. My gray hairs are coming out. I guess it started for me. I had a great coach in high school. My dad was a teacher at a key to a gym. Kind of kept me out of trouble, kept our friends and kind of family out of trouble as well too by spending a lot of time there and working on our skills. I got to make provincial teams as kind of part of that process. And so in my last year of grade 12, I ended up playing in the Coal Bowl in New Waterford, which was just a wonderful tournament to be a part of. I led the tournament in scoring. I think not to brag too much, but I think I was a top scorer in tournament history at the time. And so some of the other universities were there and they started kind of coming out of the woodwork. When I got back home and realized, okay, I can play at this level and I know I can compete at this level. I'd always looked at Acadia because of the academic environment and I knew the rankings in terms of where it's at as a university. Coming out of Newfoundland, I was student athlete of the year for the whole province. My parents were very big on kind of academic rigor and those type of things. So academics were a big part of this too. And so with that, I put together a little tape, sent it out to some key coaches around the country, and very, very grateful that Coach Nutbrown reached out after receiving that tape and kind of started the recruiting process with me through that.
So here's my question for you, and I talked to different men's basketball alumni. Dave was famous for handwritten letters to attract you to Acadia. Do you have a story?
I have a box of letters, and he was famous at writing consistently. I would get sometimes 3 in a week. And if he was traveling, I'd get a postcard that he was in Toronto or he was there or wherever it was. And I had thought actually that, his EA or whoever it might have been at the time actually wrote these things because the penmanship is beautiful. And funny enough, when I compared it to other coaches who wrote me, some of the other coaches don't write near as well. And it looked like I got some letters from 10-year-old boys or 10-year-old kids. And so that was certainly an advantage for Coach. But it just, for me, it's just, an example of the level of discipline and detail that he goes into in everything that he does. Never a whiteout on any one of those letters, all written in pen. So I don't know if he ever made a mistake, if he just balled it up and threw it out and said, I'm doing it again, but I still have all those letters at home. And certainly the other players are right. Just such a great thing that he was able to do and such a differentiator there.
Now, if I recall, a good friend of his, I think maybe he was a former teammate of his at UNB, when he played at UNB, was head coach at Memorial, Coach Taylor. Am I right with that? I
don't know if Coach Taylor played with him at
they were good friends, I know that.
But Coach Taylor was recruiting me, and kind of funny enough, as hard-lined as Coach Nutbrown is, Coach Taylor, I think, wrote in a newspaper in my grade 12 year that a good gust of wind would blow him over. So I think that kind of took money out of my recruiting model. And then funny enough, I think Coach Nutbrown probably said a few worse things to me than that when I came to Acadia. So interesting enough. Coach Taylor was probably right, though. A good gust of wind would have blown me over.
Well, I just figured that they were probably the two top schools of your choice. Probably I couldn't see Munn not being a choice. I mean, I guess you want to get away, but.
Yeah, no, it was that, and I was lucky enough, like St. FX and St. Mary's and a few others, but certainly Coach Nutbrown, his presence, that was the reason why. Like all the other things kind of went away, and it really did become about he was going to be the person to help me get to where I wanted to go, and I think I had complete faith in that, and my family had complete faith in that as well too.
You know what, Saj? I mean, and I'll stay on Dave's train here just a little bit since we started talking about him. And people that watch Dave coach over the years, I mean, one of the most intense coaches in the country, and and certainly bombastic in games and stuff and in practices. But yet, when I talk to alumni, they have this high regard for the experience they had under him. I just want you to talk to that a little bit.
I think probably, quite honestly, next to my dad, maybe my godfather, like when I think of male figures in my life that helped build my character and allowed me to achieve the things that I've been able to achieve, he is the guy. And I think that comes back to trust and transparency in your relationship and always being honest with everything. And if you didn't like it, that was going to be hard for you to deal with. But if you were able to deal with brutal honesty, and you took that and you wanted to use that to help yourself improve, there was no better person, I think, that I've ever dealt with that was able to do that. And then, the other thing about Coach Nutbrown for me was, he was able to motivate me in a unique way. And I like to think I'm very self-motivated just by my nature and by my family and kind of upbringing, but he was able to push buttons and do things to cause me to play at a level kind of beyond even, I think, what I thought I could probably get to myself. And so I give him all the credit, for that. And, when I think of the values, again, like I was thinking about this the other day where he coached me for 5 years and was never late once, ever in 5 years, was ever late for anything once. And I bet you, if you went back his 25 years, his players would probably tell you in 25 years, he was probably never late once. And so I think of little things like that those actions kind of set the framework for how you want to behave and how you want to engage people kind of moving forward. So, absolutely, I think of him in that type of regard and that type of way.
You show up at university, you're a raw young kid with lots of basketball talent. So when you look at Saj Joseph, who arrives, I think roughly 97, 98, and then you leave 5 years later, what were the big takeaways when you reflect on those 5 years? Who were you when you left Acadia in 2002?
Oh, I think of the terms I think a lot of times are high performance and leadership. And I think as much as we talk about the academic rigor at Acadia and the classroom environment, I really think that in an environment where Coach Nutbrown is building team like that and driving high performance like that, when you start, you're kind of a 17-year-old. When I came there, just trying to stumble your way through and figure it out. And then by the time you leave, there's a level of kind of understanding about leadership and how to engage others around you to drive performance. And through that, taking care of your own accountability in that process. And so I think a lot of that comes down to skill development. So where I think Coach was, the greatest that I've ever seen. And even now, I spend a lot of time with basketball and all those things, but the level of skill development for someone like me who is not maybe as athletically gifted or as physically gifted as some of the other players that I had to compete with, but to take a kid like me from Little Deer Lake and turn me into an all-conference player and lead the country in assists a couple of times and all of that kind of stuff, that is absolutely skill development from him. And I was just able to take it and deal with it and push myself through it. And so I almost think like you could take a monkey and put him in that system and Coach Nutbrown would turn them into a player like me, but you've got to be able to deal with all of that and be ready to be pushed in that type of environment. And I was fortunate that my parents were a bit like that. I come from an environment. So moving into it, it still was a shock, mind you. He still does it at another level, but I knew what to expect kind of coming into the system. And I knew I had to get those skills in order to compete with the best players. So I knew if I went to another school where they just kind of rolled the balls out and just let kids run up and down, that my gifts weren't the same as some of those other kids. And so I was going to have to use this a bit more and maybe this a bit more and kind of figure things out. And Coach Nutbrown was the person to really help me understand how to do that.
Glad you mentioned your parents because you've named an award that supports the men's basketball program after your late dad. And you and I have one thing in common, is that our parents seem to follow us around. So because your mom and dad ended up living in New Minas, did they come while you were a student?
That's right. So I think, after about my second year, I want to say, they got tired of flying back and forth or, calling them after games. And I think this was even like, it was internet era, but games weren't streamed and all of those type of things. So it's not the same experience. And I think, if you grew up like my parents, immigrating from another country, spending a lot of time following their kids around to gyms and feeling that joy of being part of that. I think, you only live one life as far as we know. And I think that they didn't want to miss that. And so they were really blessed that, my mother's a doctor. She was able to move. My dad was a retired teacher, so he was able to move. And so, yeah, they moved just onto the outskirts of New Minas. And it was, looking back, what a joy it was to have them to be able to be part of that, because, again, like Dave Nutbrown, they kind of set me up for that success by giving me opportunity and privilege and getting me the right coaching and all of those things. So for them to be able to sit up in the stands and watch me be successful. And, as a dad now, I see the pride I take when my kid hits a jumper and how excited I get about those things. So to think back to my dad, who's, unfortunately passed on, but the feelings he would have had to be able to watch me be successful through those things and the pride he would have had in that is a wonderful thing. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. And I'm sure neither of them would either if you asked them.
Show you how clueless I was at the time. I think I recall seeing your dad sitting in the stands, and I sat down and spoke with him and said, geez, you've been coming to a lot of games. And he just looks at me and he's like, I live here. Like, what? Anyways.
No, he was, the thing about my dad, like, I love this about Acadia too, in general, like all my teammates have been to my house. Do you know what I mean? They've eaten supper with my parents. All of that stuff. So I think, even now I'm in touch with my teammates on a regular basis. They ask about my parents all the time. It's one of those joys again too, of having them close in the environment that Coach Nutbrown was able to create with the right type of players and the people we recruited to the program.
Yeah, what, I'm glad you're talking about this, Saj, because it's interesting, in my world of working at Acadia now for the past almost 9 years, when you see student athletes today and you talk about those three main pillars of athletics, academics, and community, and you see all the stories and the interaction from parents, and you think, gosh, I wonder if 20 years ago or 30 years ago, they had that same kind of experience. And as you talk here, I feel like I'm talking to one of the 18-year-old student athletes that's here today.
Oh, I still get Acadia's, I couldn't give it, I couldn't praise it enough. And all aspects of it, from the coaching to people like Eric, who gave me opportunities, to Walter Eisner and amazing professors with Edith Callahan's and the business school. The friends that I was able to meet, not just in basketball, but outside of basketball. And again, Coach Nutbrown was great at this, talking about, you might skip a line at a bar one night because you put a rubber ball in a metal hoop, but there's people up the hill who are going to cure cancer and help make the world a better place. So check your ego, kid, before you think you're all that because a few people want an autograph or some kids think you're popular or whatever it might be. So I think that was a beautiful place to have that kind of balance where you're, again, meeting some amazing people, even outside of athletics, but even within athletics, the hockey teams, the football teams. I was lucky enough to get asked to take part in Polar Bear, you know what I mean, as a basketball player. So just that experience alone, which is a hockey and football tradition, as you guys know so well, but it just shows how inclusive the environment was or is and still is. And the benefit of that for athletes like myself as we move on to other phases of our life.
Saj, when you reflect back at your time at Acadia, so we'll put this into two silos, is there a moment or two for you personally for something maybe you accomplished on the floor that you always reflect on? And I guess the other silo would be, is there a team that you reflect back on in those years that you played?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot, probably like a lot of the other athletes talk about. And I think, and I take as many off the court and on the court and all of those things together, but certainly on the court moments. I think about, my first year where our team was ranked, 5th in the country, top 5 in the country, pretty much all year long. And we won the AUS championship that year, beating a really strong Dal team with Brian Parkers and Mark Sables and, people that had gone on to NBA tryouts. What I mean, at that time, and if we remember those Dal years and the level of recruitment that they were able to pull in players from all over North America. And so we beat that team with the great Jan Trojanowski and that year, and Derek Cotton, Jim O'Grady, Murray, and Chris and JP and that whole group. So that was a phenomenal team to be a part of and to be around, and especially as a first year player, because the majority of those guys were 4th and 5th year players. So coming in as a first year player, you really understood the culture was already built. They knew how to play the system. They knew what coaches' expectations were. And now it was about going out and executing and competing and taking care of those details. And so as a first year player coming into that, you got to really understand where the bar was and what you needed to do to get there. So I think about that team, and quite honestly, we lost to McMaster in the first round of the Nationals. And I think we lost by 6 or 8 points. And I think it was Steve Mega tore us up. He was a great, national team player, great point guard. But I think, we were right there in the mix of the top 2 or 3 teams, I would say, in the country, and would have put us up against everybody on any given night that year. So, quite proud of that team. And I think we were 16-4 in the conference. So, just a great record and great year. And then when I think of individual moments, I think back to, I think it was my 4th year, and we were playing Cape Breton at the Metro Center in the first round of the playoffs. And I think we were down 1 with maybe 8-10 seconds left. And, coach calls a timeout. He said, I had a good game, and, he had said, okay, we're going to get you the ball. You're going to break some guys down and see what happens. You got 10 seconds and you're going full court here. And so it just kind of happens like a movie, right? You just, you make a cut, someone reached too far and took themselves out of position, you catch the ball and you're looking up the court, and you got a whole court ahead of you and you got some speed, and boom, down I went, and I got right to the foul line. And I still remember this kind of like it was yesterday. Someone picked me up, and I guess like a good coach player, I dropped the pass off to the open teammate, and that was Phil Davis. And Phil had actually never been in a playoff game. So he had transferred from UPEI. This was his first playoff game in his 4th year. And so Phil catches the ball with 1.7 left and knocks down a all net buzzer beater to win the game and knock UCB out in that first round. And then Phil proceeds, as he's making the shot, to, because of his excitement, run right out the door, right into the locker room with and the whole team is following him out the door because they think the game is over. And I still remember this. Thank God for Mike Messenger keeping his cool, because there was still a second left, and he, all these guys were running off the court like the game was over, and he actually stole the inbounds pass when they threw it back in, that they might have got a shot off. So I think that's one that I often think about, and I think about too. It goes back to the way we think at Acadia I think about Phil and that experience for him. And to be able to make that shot. And so, I was just a small part of that, making a pass to him, but that experience for our team and to celebrate in those ways was just a great memory.
Oh, you mentioned the little guy, your little guy, Mike. How old is he now, Saj?
He's 8.
8 years old. So you obviously lived in an era when technology was improving. Like, do you have old game videotapes? Do you sit down and say, Micah, here's dad?
That's funny. I got a couple, and I kind of joke. What's nice is that, I've got some good statistics from my playing years and not a lot of tape. So the myth can be bigger than the reality, which I really like, actually, because if they watch the tape, they'll be like, that guy, he's a little slower than, I'm not sure if he can really keep up today. So I'm glad that there's not much of that exists. Len, I kind of joke with him, but I have not had a chance to watch. I think he might find it a bit boring right now, but I'm sure I will someday force him to sit down and watch me play a little bit.
The game has changed so much in the last 20 years. Do you like the game today? When you watch the Raptors or NBA, do you like it?
You know what? I think part of this is, I think of this in leadership too, of knowing when it's your time to pass the baton and let someone else do it. So even now, quite honestly, like, I'm the chair of basketball for my son's school at Arbury Academy, and we were lucky enough to recruit 2 great coaches from Acadia, Jalen Skier and John Tramble, to come build a program, at that school. And what's amazing about John and Jalen is that they're new school coaches, and so they push me. I joke, if I was teaching my son how to dribble, he'd dribble like Bob Cousy in 1960 right now. Do you know what I mean? And because I don't know how to teach it any other way. That's kind of how I grew up, and that's what it is. But we all watch today with the kids and the bounce and the kind of style that they are able to do with this stuff. And so when I think of John and Jalen and modern coaches, I think they're the people that have got to be able to teach these new ways to do it. And old school people like myself have got to be open-minded enough to say the game's evolved and we need to evolve with it as well too. And so what I love about it is, with the group of people often that I surround myself with, we have great discussions about, should it be done that way? Should it be done that way? What is the right way to be able to do this? And then we kind of work together to find the solution there. And so I think some of the new school coaches, I like pushing them to think about, some of those old school things like grit and determination and pushing through, and, if it's too easy, it's not worth doing, and all of that those kind of Coach Nutbrown methodologies that would have been built into me over the years, combined with, more flexibility. And I often call it like this idea that you give complete trust to players today, and you allow them to be creative and show their magic, if I could use that type of language. And I think sometimes older school coaching would have been like, I'm going to de-risk all of that by reducing the chances of them making mistakes. And I think with that, you don't get the same magic necessarily that comes out of it. So I think what new age coaching has done is it's given maybe a little more power back to the player and a little more trust back to the player to say, I'm going to let you do your thing and you make the decision about what the best is to do. And I'm going to try and teach you and build your confidence to be able to do that. So to me, it's an interesting balance, trying to balance both of those things out as we coach players today.
This is eerily similar to my girls when they were younger, bringing home math homework and the new way of, doing multiplication. It's like, I didn't do it that way and I can't show you the new way. So good on you to be able to adjust and learn from the new coaches.
Totally. I think, again, I go back to like, everyone has their time. And, I'm not a professional coach. I don't do it full time. It's like an armchair quarterback, or I often say I know enough to be dangerous. Is kind of my comment. And so, I often, again, just find great people with great values who care deeply about wanting the best for the kids and whatever else. And I think if you do that, then you just create an environment for these kids to be successful and for these coaches to be successful as well, which is, so that's one of my big passion projects actually, and something I'm really excited about.
I was going to ask you, the 5 years at Acadia, I'm sure you got a million stories that you can't tell us. But I'm kind of curious because, I was early when you were here, I was in my 4th or 5th year working, and I made that transition from athlete, and Nutbrown would even question whether I was an athlete or not, to working here. And a lot of characters on the team. I'm curious to know who those characters were. Who were the guys that you wanted to be roomed with, or who was the guy that was always fun to be a roommate with on the road trips, if there were any of those guys?
So coach was always good about putting us together with kind of by position. So I think a lot of times Victor Herbert, who's a great friend of mine, would be my roommate. And Victor, I love you, but it was awful because he's from the Caribbean and he wanted it to be 30 degrees at night. And I was from Newfoundland and I wanted to be -20 in the room at night. And so literally, I feel like all night you would get up and someone was turning the thermostat up and down all night. So I'm not sure how much sleep we we got a lot of those nights, but we would room a lot like that with point guards, 2 guards, post players, whatever it might be. And I think the idea was that, we were going to have the same matchups the next night or whatever for the weekend. So we were going to make sure that we understood, the things that we had to do and to be able to get done. So Victor certainly is one great roommate that I had all over those years. And there's a million stories, Eric, I guess I could tell. I mean, I often, think about, again, the level of discipline that Coach Nutbrown dictated in people. And so I remember one year, and I won't mention the player, but I remember one year a point guard came down and took a 3-pointer in transition without making any passes. And I think if anyone's here laughing already, if anyone knows how we played at Acadia back in those days, the ball would move and people would move, and it was about getting the best shot and having the right person take it in a lot of cases. And so this point guard came down in practice, pulled up, just took a 3. And so he blows the whistle and stops practice and calls everyone in. And he says, "Do you think that was a good shot?" He says that to the guard. And of course, my friend is a little confident in his abilities and says, "Of course that was a good shot. I believe it was a good shot." He says, "Everybody line up on the end line." And he gives this guard the ball and he says, "You go down at the other end line." And he makes him dribble full speed down the end and stop at the 3-point line and shoot. And he makes him do it about 20 times, okay, in a row, like full speed 20 times. And so you guys would know after the 5th time, you're gassed and so tired that you can't, to shoot a 3-pointer, you got no chance. So at the end of 20 shots, I'm going to say my friend might have made 3. And he calls everybody back in and he says, "Okay, so now you're going to tell me that that's a good shot or not a good shot." So I guess at the end of the day, he proved his point. But those were the things for Coach Nutbrown where, there's a million like that where he could call you out in a way that was just.
Oh my gosh. And he was not afraid to do that in a game either.
No, I mean, I remember, I don't think, I think of him like a dad to me, but I remember my parents one time, they came to watch a game in my 1st year, 2nd year. And I was coming off the court and he was screaming at me that I'd never make the dean's list because, I'll say I wasn't smart enough. Now he might've used different language at the time. And so my parents sitting behind the bench are listening to, the 92 average kid coming out of high school, coming into Acadia, who's like their coach is telling him that he's not very smart and not going to make the dean's list because of how he plays. So I think there was all of those kind of things, but again, all designed to challenge you to rise to the occasion. And that when you got the maturity to deal with that, the other players almost became easier to deal with in some ways in terms of how you played those, because you had so much knowledge in terms of how to force them the right way, the place where they were weakest. And if you took all of that into play, you had a great chance to outplay your player, even if they were 20 times more athletic or more skilled or whatever it might be. And so again, I go back to him, and teaching those things to a 130 pound, 5 foot nothing guy like me was a blessing, to say the least.
Saj, you're telling that story about the point guard shooting the 3-point shot, and all I keep hearing in my head is "move the ball." Dave's signature phrase.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, I think that's a beautiful way to play too, when I think about it, right? We did not play where people ran plays to one player and 4 other players stood around in the corner and did other things. We played an equal opportunity offense. It was about players moving and people moving and all working together and all being on the same page. And so when I think again about life lessons, and I think about leading teams now and all of those type of things, those are the exact same principles that we apply, today, whether it's within business or community organizations or whatever else it is, to get people kind of aligned towards the same goal and focused on achieving it.
Yeah, I really strongly believe in the importance of athletics. Like, I believe that athletics offers, and I use this often, is it offers an education beyond the classroom. So with that in mind, what's your biggest takeaway from your 5 years of basketball with Coach Nutbrown?
Probably, maybe what I felt as I got older more than anything else is the kind of the burden of responsibility. And so, that I often, I got to speak at the Acadia Business Dinner last year. I quoting Spider-Man's, with great privilege comes great responsibility, right? And I think what I took from Coach Nutbrown was never being late. I've seen the practice plans, where the level of detail in these practice plans. I mean, this is a person who's coached Steve Nash and, national teams and all of that kind of stuff. And so I think what I took from that is I have a responsibility to make sure I lead in the right way, and that I feel the weight of that, maybe is the way that I think about it. So, often as leaders, everyone thinks, oh, you have it good and all of this kind of stuff, you get to be the leader. But I think more than anything, what I think often about it is that, leadership can be lonely, and there's a great burden associated with it.
Sure.
Because, at night when others are sleeping and they're not worried about it as much, it's the Coach Nutbrowns that would have been up till 4 a.m. watching game film to come in to talk to me about how my right foot wasn't in the right position on the 3rd possession or whatever it might have been, that just seemed like, oh my God, how did you even pick that out after watching film that long? And so that level of care about wanting your team to be the best, your players to do their best. And so I think of that often even in how I lead and the responsibility I have to try and help the people who work with me to get to wherever they want to go, or go further than even maybe they thought they could go as well too. So I think, that would certainly be one key takeaway I take from Coach Nutbrown. And then the other, big one is competitiveness. There's no question about that. The guy is, there's the level of competition and I live that too. And so I had some of that in me, but I think he was able to kind of harness it and kind of pull it out and shape it into a whole new thing. And so that's another piece too that I think is at times in today's society we view as negative, especially with kids and things of that nature. But I think healthy competition with yourself is a beautiful thing. And the idea of continuously holding yourself accountable and pushing yourself to be better is another great lesson that I take from the program, from my professors at Acadia as well too, but certainly from Coach Nutbrown.
Saj, you've had leadership roles. You were the president of Color. You're with a different company now, but you've had great success since you left the court at Acadia. Just sort of talk in generalities about your career post university.
Sure, I would say, the reality is probably, and I don't say this to knock anybody else, but I probably worked harder than most people. And at times my wife would probably tell you I shouldn't have done that, and I could have balanced it a bit better. And I probably still would have gotten to where I would have gotten to maybe just 5 years later or something along those lines. But I chose, again, just with my mindset and my nature, to really push hard, kind of in my career and push for success. And so, whether it was the United Nations, the ad agency world, the cannabis world that I've operated in probably for the last 5 years, in executive roles and now the president of a great local company. I often, think back to, again, that burden of leadership and the responsibility I have, within that. And, again, representing my parents, representing Acadia, representing Coach Nutbrown, representing my teammates. So again, that's part of kind of me, I guess, in some ways, in saying that where I go, I represent these people, and I want to make sure that they're proud of me. Do you know what I mean? In terms of how I treat people every day, and what I do and the decisions that I make. And there's times that we're going to make shots, and there's times we're going to miss shots, and there's all of that goes on in life and in business and everything else. But I think this idea of staying even keel and holding yourself accountable to those core values and principles that you really believe in are really what's kind of allowed me, I think, to be successful. And I think, when I look back at the relationships that I've been able to build and the trust that I've been able to build with people, it all comes from that perspective of wanting the best for them and wanting them to achieve greatness. And like a great point guard, you take the blame when you fail and you give the credit when you win. And so I think those are, again, some of those underlying principles that I just loved about Acadia basketball and Acadia athletics in general. And you could see it in the hockey team, you'd see it within the football team, where, you'd see that great quarterback, Trevor Blaine, whoever it was. You see the great hockey players, Ammon Root and all those kind of guys. I remember watching the Pater and all those guys, and you'd see them take responsibility when there was a loss or the team didn't play the way that they were supposed to. And as soon as there was a win or success, to not want any of the credit for it, but to push that on to other people. And I think that's what leadership in a lot of ways is about, in helping your teams and those people get to where they want to go. So I think those are, some of the things that I was able to just feel and learn just by being part of athletics, being part of the basketball program, and being at the school.
Well, you know what you brought to the court every night at Acadia, you brought to life, and no surprise to any of us that know you and watched you play and how you conducted yourself on and off the court. And you know what, I can tell you right now that your university is extremely proud of all the accomplishments you've had. And this has been great, Saj, to be able to catch up, and I hope someday that maybe we'll see Micah running around the floor at Acadia.
I'm telling Kevin Duffy, you got to get at him early. There's going to be lots of offers out there, so you got to get at him early. But no, I couldn't. Glenn, I appreciate that very much. I think it really is a special place. I think in the Ray Ivany years when I was doing marketing more, we would often try to talk about, it's like pixie dust. Like, how do you describe magic? How do you describe a university on the Bay of Fundy with the highest tides in the world, and a fair trade town, and people like the cake lady who would come to every one of our games, and every year we made the playoffs, there would be a cake for us. You know what I mean? That, like, you can't make those things up. And so there is this special place in Wolfville and in Little Nova Scotia where these things are still happening. And I think it's an amazing place for student athletes to want to be a part of, and for students in general to want to be a part of. So I couldn't, you'll never stop me from singing the praises of the school and the people and my experience here. That's for sure.
Well, I appreciate you doing this, and all the best in your future years. And like you said, in 10 short years, maybe there'll be another Joseph running around the campus of Acadia. So
that would be great. Give Eric some more gray hairs. That'd be great. That's great. Thank you very much, Len and Eric. Very, very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Saj.
Okay.